Imagine an unsettling hypothetical with me. Russia launches a hypersonic missile from deep inside their borders, and it's aimed straight at Washington, D.C. To get there, it'll have to fly through the Arctic, past Greenland, then over Canada in order to eventually slam into its target. Now, here's the question. How well can the US defend against this attack if it doesn't have Canada's help? Donald Trump is pitching a new missile defense system, made in America to protect America.
I'm asking Congress to fund a state-of-the-art Golden Dome missile defense shield to protect our homeland, all made in the USA.
He has invited Canada to join, but on his terms. Canada's two choices, as he sees it, either pay $61 billion for protection, and just for reference, that's almost 3 times Canada's entire annual defense budget, or join the US as the 51st state.
They have a very small military. They rely on our military. We basically protect Canada.
But when it comes to missile defense specifically, every single expert we spoke to said it's not that simple. And if the US were to try to go it alone, it would be creating all kinds of problems for itself.
What I would say, and if I were advising your nation's leadership, is just present the facts. Canada brings a lot.
When we think about what threats the US is most worried about, Russia, North Korea, China, Iran, they're all on the other side of the world, meaning 2 things. The US needs to be able to shoot down long-range cruise missiles, hypersonic weapons, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and they need to consider what direction those projectiles might come from. Could they reach the US by flying over the Pacific or Atlantic Oceans? Sure, but that's hardly the shortest distance. You can shave off around a quarter of that trip if instead of going east or west, you go north.
If you look at a map of the world or a globe and you look at it straight from the north, you can see the most direct path for, let's say, Russia and China is going to go right through the Arctic. It's basically the path by which any attack that comes to North America is going to fly over.
Now, from space, satellites can see a missile launch pretty easily by picking up the sudden blast of heat, but actually tracking the flight path of something hurtling through the air at several times the speed of sound while the Earth is spinning and the satellites are moving themselves. That's a lot harder. So you need ground-based radar in your detection toolkit too. So if we go back to our example of Russia targeting Washington with a hypersonic missile. Let me see if I can see it here. So let's say it's launching from right on the Kazakhstan border. And that rocket, that missile, flies over the Arctic Circle and towards Washington, D.C. Most likely the first ground-based radar that'll be able to track it in real time would be in Canada's far north. Meaning Canada isn't just a bystander in a conflict like this, it's the front line.
If you look at just how high latitude a lot of these islands are, it can provide potentially also an earlier warning for potential strikes if there are radar sites or other systems in there.
And we can put some rough numbers to this point about early warning. Let's go back to that scenario where a hypersonic missile is traveling from Russia to Washington, D.C. And let's make some assumptions. First, that the missile is traveling at Mach 8. That's 8 times the speed of sound. And it's traveling at about that speed the whole way. In reality, these kinds of missiles have different flight phases where they can travel at different speeds, but let's just keep it simple. So it's hurtling through the air and then up through space at almost 10,000 kilometers an hour, which is almost 3 kilometers per second. We're looking here at a total approximate flight time of about 56 minutes. A conventional ground-based radar in Canada's north might be able to start tracking that missile about 32 minutes into its flight. So T-minus 24 minutes to impact.
Flight times for a lot of these systems is basically measured in tens of minutes, right? And every minute counts.
But now, imagine that same radar is placed much further south, say near the Canada-US border. At that point, you might not be able to effectively track that missile until it's only about 6 minutes away, which is just moments before its terminal stage of plummeting towards Earth from space at maximum speed.
If you're aware of a threat or a potential threat 2,000 miles away, vice 200 miles away. As a leader of a country, you can pick up the phone and have a conversation with the leader of another country for deterrent effects.
That gives us more decision space. It gives us more options. We want to be able to call out bad behavior and say, we know what you're doing and we have a prepared response for you.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, but the US isn't just the lower 48 states, right? There is northern radar coverage in Alaska, for example, even in Greenland, for that matter. And that's true, but those radar stations only really cover a relatively narrow slice of Arctic approaches. Meanwhile, Canada's northern landmass spans roughly 25% of the Earth's circumference at the Arctic Circle, giving it the capacity to detect threats from many angles.
If you look at the nature of the width that Canada has in the north, in the Arctic, it's a pretty significant gap if we didn't work together with the United States to cover this area.
So yes, Canada's geography makes it invaluable to American missile defense. But of course, it's not just about land. It's about what this country has built and is building on that land. Canada understands missile defense. It's been part of NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, since it was established back in 1958. And by the 1980s, Canada became a key player, pouring serious money into building out a chain of radar stations stretching from Yukon to Labrador.
You have done a lot for since 1958 with NORAD. You know, you funded 40% of the North Warning System, or the systems up front.
Now, those systems, as far as we know, haven't actually ever had to deal with an incoming missile threat. But that's kind of the way it's supposed to work. Missile defense almost being more about deterrence than actually having to intercept threats all the time. And that's not to say they haven't been useful in other ways, too. Just one example, recently spotting both Russian and Chinese bombers flying near Alaska, aircraft capable of carrying dozens of cruise missiles.
Some of what NORAD does, which is to warn of any incoming air threats and aerospace threats, that is going to be part of Golden Dome, because in order to be able to defeat a variety of missiles, you have to be aware that they're incoming.
We are over 60% of the northern approaches is covered by Canada, or more, depending on how you calculate it. Our sensors are pretty vital for being able to detect threats coming from that axis.
And that's especially true when you consider how Canada is investing tens of billions of dollars into new radar systems on its own, with the goal of taking its threat spotting power to a whole new level.
What we need to be able to do is see around the curvature of the Earth as far away as possible, because that's most likely where the launch points are going to be.
Yeah, this is where things get a bit more sophisticated. Most traditional radar systems can only see as far as the horizon, like looking straight ahead on a flat road. But there is another special kind of radar that can see beyond the curvature of the Earth. These over-the-horizon radar systems work by shooting high-frequency radio waves up into the sky and bouncing them off the upper atmosphere back down to the surface. This lets you see threats from thousands of kilometers away. The US currently has one of these systems looking out over the southern horizon, monitoring threats from Central and South America. It's also investing in at least two more to keep an eye on the Pacific. But what it doesn't have is one looking north. Canada, though, is building two such systems right now.
We've just recently let a contract to build the first set of them. For the foreseeable future, it is probably the main system that we're going to invest in.
According to the Canadian government, these new systems include an Arctic over-the-horizon radar and a polar over-the-horizon radar, both intended to provide early warning radar coverage and expected to be fully operational by 2031 and 2033. Those are expected to give Canada even more lead time over and above the detection capabilities that we calculated earlier.
With the over-the-horizon radar capability, now you're able to see several thousand miles. And so it may be a tenfold difference in timing that you gain on awareness of the launch platform.
And worth restating, these radar systems don't just detect incoming missiles from further away. It's their ability to see everything else, like a plane flying over the ocean, which might be carrying a hypersonic missile, or a space-based threat orbiting before it drops down into national airspace, or even a missile-armed warship deep in the Arctic Ocean.
Over-the-horizon capability is not just for missiles. It can see maritime all the way to space. So that's a significant contribution to overall domain awareness for potential threats to North America.
Our adversaries are increasingly emboldened. We cannot and should not look first to others to defend our nation.
Now, technically, these systems are still part of Canada's commitment to NORAD. So right now, the US gets access to this tech too. But under the NORAD agreement, each country owns the assets it contributes. So when Canada builds and funds a radar system, it controls how it's operated, who can access the data, how alerts are managed, meaning, despite Trump's claims, Canada clearly does have something to offer besides money or its sovereignty.
As the NORAD commander and NORTHCOM commander, the last thing I wanted to be doing was shooting down missiles over North America. You're much better off deterring in the first place or going after the archer, not the arrow. And so Canada offers a lot when it comes to maritime awareness, airborne platform, and subsea.
Now look, it is important to remember that Canada is still not the superpower here, right? Canada does absolutely rely on American money and might for protection. But it's also true that defending this continent requires Canada's eyes and ears. There's just too much ground to cover. Millions of square kilometers, which makes missile defense in North America a very complex problem to solve. So when Trump drops ultimatums like pay up or become the 51st state, Canada would seem to have at least some room to say, well, hold on, let's talk.